Hey everybody, Matt Barton here with this week's Broker Minute or Two. Hey, I wanted to start with a quote today that will kind of set up what I wanted to cover. So share my screen here. Many legal battles in the construction industry, and I would broaden that to say just in real estate, revolve around contract interpretation disputes. Care in contract drafting is a valuable way to avoid disputes. I mean, that sounds so obvious, right? And yet sometimes we're kind of neglectful of that very fact. I have discussions with agents sometimes. Well, if we litigated, we would prevail. I'm like, oh my gosh, please don't even say those words, because the pain that is taken in trying to litigate something is never worth the lift. Okay, back to the contract. A fundamental principle of contract interpretation is to ascertain and give effect to the party's objectively expressed intent. What a party was trying to say without accurately expressing it does not count. So let me give you a different version of that. Well, everybody knew what it meant. Doesn't count. Not in the world of contracts. Contract terms are usually given their ordinary dictionary meaning unless the contract specifically defines them. So this is where I wanted to go today. I'm going to cover, let's see, 6 quick items in the REPSI. And I've highlighted areas where, let me pull my picture over here, that we should be paying attention to. So anytime there is a title given to a section or something, as you can see here in quotes, in parentheses, it becomes a proper term of the contract. It has meaning and it should be paid attention to, and we should be consistent with the terms that are used. Otherwise, we go back to, the does not count, right? If we just assume everybody knew what it meant, that doesn't count in contracts. So with that said, let's talk about a couple of things. Earnest money seems so straightforward, but I have had experiences with agents who say, oh, well, I thought construction deposit and earnest money were pretty much the same thing. Or somebody can just say a further deposit is required of the buyer or the seller, or whatever the case may be. Earnest money is a very specific term in the contract with lots of contractual governance on what is done with it, what it can and cannot be used for. So that's the first obvious one. The second one, purchase price versus sales price, right? Section 2. Here we go. Section 2. The proper term is purchase price. If I do a search in this document and look for sales price, guess what? It doesn't exist. So going back to the definition of the legal resource that I use, it says that unless it is specifically defined, we'll use the dictionary meaning. Well, if it hadn't been defined as purchase price, then sales price would fly. But in the contract, it is defined as quote unquote purchase price. And therefore, I see addendums that say sales price to be reduced to such and such. Like, you do realize you just created a potential out for that addendum being valid or not. So again, pay attention to the terms, use the contractual terms. Third one, days, right? Is there a definition? Control F, days, right? And we go to that. The first one is in regards to earnest money, and it's calendar days. If I go to the next one, right, we're down here in section 3, how many calendar days? You see in a consistency, calendar days. Then we have 30 or more consecutive days. Consecutive would require it to be a calendar day. And again and again, 7 calendar days. So the point being here that days is defined in this contract. It is calendar days. I've had people say, well, I thought it meant business days. Well, it's actually defined in the contract. Therefore, there is no ambiguity. So make sure when you use the term days, you know it refers to calendar days. And if you have a holiday in the way, doesn't matter. It's still a day. All right. Fourth one, settlement, right, as defined here in section 3.1, right, has a very specific definition of what settlement is and when it actually occurs. And there's a deadline attached to it. And we all know this, but I still see instances of this where people talk about, well, closing to be extended until such and such a date. That's not really a thing. The only reason closing exists in this contract is what happens after settlement. It hinges on settlement taking place. There isn't a closing deadline. There's a settlement deadline. And then the way the contract reads is within 4 days after settlement, the property is to be closed. So again, words matter. And I would say with the whole settlement and closing side of things, then there's the kicker of possession, right? Closing doesn't mean possession, right? That's why these are in sequence: settlement, closing, possession, because they're kind of additive in nature. So just because somebody settled doesn't mean they get to go the property. Just because it was recorded, funded, and all the documents transferred doesn't mean they get the property. Those two things combined with whatever is specified in possession is when the new buyer can take the property. All right, moving along. Due diligence versus inspection. Get this a lot. If we need to extend the due diligence deadline, right, that is in Section 8, it is a properly defined term, due diligence condition, right? Due diligence deadline in Section 24. If we're going to extend that, don't call it inspection deadline to be extended till such and such. There is no inspection deadline, okay? And again, I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but I go back to the paragraph we started off with. If it's defined in the contract, you're obligated to use the contractual terms. Anything else, when something is already defined, is potentially invalid because it's not a term of the contract. All right, last one. Notification. Now, this isn't so much, competing with another term, but, there's different parts in the contract that says, the seller's to be notified or the buyer's to be notified. Even when it's on an addendum, the addendum becomes part of the purchase contract. And Section 18 is very clear. It is defined what is proper notice and what is not proper notice. Man, I get this all the time. So I have it when somebody said, well, I sent them a text, or I called them and I told them. Well, that's great. Thanks for being proactive on your communication. But notices that affect a contract are very specific. Must be in writing, must be signed by the party, not the agent, must be signed by the buyer or the seller giving notice, and it must be received by the other side, their agent or their brokerage firm. So this is just a very detailed reminder that the terms that we use in contracts are very important. If we're smart about it, they become our friend, and we can be very clear in our contracts. When we don't pay attention to them, they often come back and bite us in the butt. So hopefully that was a good reminder for you guys. You're doing great. Appreciate all that you do, and I wish you much success the rest of this week.